Good evening to all. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So, many thanks to Joydeep and all the organizers of the college. In fact, I was looking for an opportunity to speak on this topic because it is one of the most misinterpreted aspects of Sri Aurobindo. And in fact, most of the left historians have dominated the last 50, 60 years in India. And they were not quite kind to Sri Aurobindo. They have either summarily left him or made a division that Aurobindo Ghose and Sri Aurobindo are two different people. One was in politics and one left politics and became a recluse. Now, this is the popular conception about Sri Aurobindo. Now, my lecture will be divided into three parts. I will start from Sri Aurobindo, then come back to Aurobindo Ghose of Kolkata. Then I will once again go back to Sri Aurobindo of Pondicherry. So let me start with what Sri Aurobindo is. Sri Aurobindo's major works were serialized between 1914 and 1921. And what he did is very striking. He liberated the Gita from the hands of the Orthodox Hindus. He liberated the Veda in his book, The Secret of the Veda, from the Orthodox Hindus. And he had a new conception of human unity, which he recorded in his book, The Ideal of Human Unity. In all, if I give you the list of his prose publications during this period, which includes politics also and sociology, a totally misconception about Sri Aurobindo that he left politics after 1910. So he wrote The Secret of the Veda, essays on the Gita, the synthesis of yoga, the human cycle, which is about the evolution of human societies, the life divine about the evolution, spiritual evolution of man. Man is not final, is a transitional creature. Bioscience won't be satisfied with an imperfect model, and man is bound for a new species. And then war and self-determination, where he speaks of the end of war, how war can be ended. And there, of course, he speaks a lot on feminism, on patriarchy. In fact, here is God's plenty in between 1914 and 1921. And he was suggesting a yoga, which he called integral yoga or the yoga of transformation. The yoga of transformation. Just a minute. And there was some disturbance. So this yoga is actually the transformation of the human being, and it will initiate a passage from man to the next species. Because man is at present the most superior, he believes that man is final. No, because nature won't be satisfied with an imperfect model. So man will initiate that leap from man to a new species, a new creation. And he speaks of this along with his politics of resistance, on various levels. Like in the foundations of Indian culture, he anticipated 60 years before Edward Said's Orientalism. Much before Edward Said, Sri Aurobindo had said the East is a Western construct. And he defended Indian culture along with Persian culture, not excluding them, because he favored the Mughal period more than the British period. So this is his work for humanity. And to do Sri Aurobindo's yoga, he specifically says that you don't have to change your religion, because the age of religion is over. And it differentiates in the human cycle between religionism and religion. Real religion is spirituality. That is the essence of religion. And there every religion is united. At the same time, he says, and this is striking, contrary to the other historians who think that this Aryan civilization was 3005 years old. In the Ishopanishad, Sri Aurobindo claims that this civilization could be more than 10,000 years old. And you must have noticed the digging up of new civilizations, 8,900, 9,000 years old very recently. So he saw it much before. And the advent of mass society in 1980, he had anticipated that in the human cycle. So he liberated Aces on the Gita, the life divine, the synthesis of yoga from the clutches of Orthodox Hindus, that these texts do not belong to the Hindus or so-called Hindus. Because who is the audience? In the secret of the Veda, he indicates who is the audience. There is no reference to Hindu. Even in Pondicherry, he does not refer much to the phrase Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan Dharma is not Dharma. It has been hijacked by certain political parties. Even Uttarpada's speech of the Kolkata period was hijacked by certain political parties. And it's totally misinterpreted, because Sanatan Dharma is not Dharma at all. It is a way of life, it is a prescription of life, it is a way of transforming human consciousness. And there, the Japanese, the Chinese, which is the most difficult to transform, as the mother has said, the Chinese. But it aims to entirely transform human consciousness, and if 10% changes, then there is a possibility for a better society, a better global society. Now let's come back to Kolkata and Baroda. Sri Aurobindo returned from England to India in 1893. And in 1894, Bankim Chandra died. He greeted Bankim Chandra with 7 cultural essays. And that was the first post-colonial resistance from Sri Aurobindo, when he claimed that it is an insult to Bankim Chandra Chatterjee when you call him the Scot of Bengal. It's a terrible insult to Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, an original Bengali novelist, as a mere replica of an imperfect Scotch author. He said Bankim is far superior in characterization, in penetrating into the psychology of women, and almost in all things except for the power of narration, where he says Scott is slightly ahead than Bankim. So this is the first resistance. Then he tried to renationalize himself. He was already a master of Greek, Latin, Italian, French, and he knew a little of German. He started learning Sanskrit and other Indian languages. And he started writing on Vyasa, Valmiki, and Kalidasa. And the idea is to show the world that India has a rich treasure, and Valmiki and Vyasa are as good as Homer, Shakespeare, Dante, Sophocles. So in Baroda, he wrote a lot on the Indian scriptures. And once again, even in Baroda, it is a resistance to what Frantz Fanon later called in his 1961 text, Wretched of the Earth. Fanon used the word colonization of the psyche. Sri Aurobindo used it in 1907, and even before that he was hinting at it. Echoing Vivekananda, we as a nation have lost our individuality. We as a nation have lost our individuality. The Swami was almost crying. Unfortunately, he didn't live long. He was sick, his health failed, and he died a premature death. And Sri Aurobindo came to Kolkata in 1906 and he plunged into the national movement, became the editor of Bonde Mataram. And between 1906 and 1908, it was, this area is called extremism, terrorism by most of the left historians. And it is called Hindu nationalism, which is again a term which is highly debatable. Because Sri Aurobindo tried his absolute best. Today Muslims are more enlightened than before, than 1907. But in 1905, 6, 7, it was very difficult to convince them. Sri Aurobindo insisted on that. Please try to change your mentality. And Bonde Mataram used to be published from Lahore in Urdu. And you'll be surprised to know that leading Muslim scholars like Arif Muhammad Khan, who translated the Bonde Mataram and appreciated it, Firoz Vakht Ahmed praised its melody and patriotism. Rafi Ahmed Kidwai, who was a minister in Nehru's cabinet, he was highly appreciative of Vande Mataram. Later, Rabindranath objected to certain lines from it, and he preferred Jano Gano to Subhash Chandra Bose. But it was there, and Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was very fond of it. So it was mainly because of this divide and rule policy, and also Khilafat movement, which Gandhiji patronized. Sri Aurobindo repeatedly cautioned Gandhiji, don't do it, don't patronize Khilafat movement. But that flared up the communal tension more and more in India. But Sri Aurobindo never said you should go out. And Sri Aurobindo, more than Rabindranath and Vivekananda, except for Ramakrishna, because Ramakrishna used to do namaz in the absence of Maulavi. He did for quite some time. he substituted for the Maulvi, he did namaz. So after Ramakrishna, he was the first to appreciate Islam, Quran, and Hazrat Muhammad, specifically claiming for Hazrat Muhammad the title Jogi Srestho in Gitar Bhumika, his Bengali book. So it was not a proper estimate which the leftists did. Like in the calling of history, Dipesh Chakraborty is very slyly denigrating Jadunath Sarkar because he gave us a true picture of Mughal history. And then Partha Chatterjee is silent, almost silent, and very brief whenever they come to Sri Aurobindo. Only Ashish Nandi has given us a 12-page narrative in The Intimate Enemy. And you can't imagine, we can't write a satire on Ramakrishna or Rabindranath Tagore. But Ashish Nandi did that. He wrote a satirical portrait of Sri Aurobindo in The Intimate Enemy. Well, they are majority and we are minorities. We can't defend that. Sachidananda Mohanty protested against it many times. But we couldn't do because it's a very heavy bulk of left historians who claim that Sri Aurobindo was a terrorist, an extremist, and his nationalism, because it is, they call it religious nationalism. I call it spiritual nationalism. And he called the Muslims, when they refused to come, Sri Aurobindo said, let us go together. I don't think there is a great fault in calling the country mother. Sugata Bose has, in his book, The Nation as Mother, and other essays, he has defended the concept of mother, the country as mother. And elsewhere also, Sugata Bose has defended, because he had to, because he was defending Subhash Chandra Bose, his grandfather. Now, this misinterpretation of Sri Aurobindo as, and I think the level Hindu monk tagged to Vivekananda was also a fault. Vivekananda himself was responsible for that. Because this Hindu is a very controversial term these days. So in the light of the present, if you go back to Sri Aurobindo and say that Sri Aurobindo was a Hindu terrorist, nationalist, extremist, and Sumit Sarkar has said a very interesting thing. He has said that it is virtually it's a decorative vocabulary. There's a call in between from my head. So he called it, Sumit Sarkar called it, for all of them called it elitism. And it did not include the Muslims, it did not include the subalterns. If it did not include the Muslims and the subalterns, then Mayer Deya Mota Kapod, Mota Chal, how come these metaphors propped up? So, Sumit Sarkar said it was verbal and literary violence. And he goes on to say that Sri Aurobindo made an honorable retreat to Pondicherry because it was a failure. The entire elitist movement was a failure. Now this has to be repaired. And the first thing to do is to revive R.C. Mojumdar and Jadunath Sarkar. Because a very big brand of left historians. So we have to revive first Jadunath Sarkar and R.C. Mujumdar to know what it was exactly. So it was verbal and literary violence that Sri Aurobindo did, Aurobindo Ghose did, and it was an honorable retreat to Pondicherry. Now this is, in general, the brief, sly attack on Sri Aurobindo. And I found Ashish Nandi extremely disturbing. His language is quite offensive in Intimate Enemy. So it is not true that the subaltern and the Muslims were not included. And Sri Aurobindo was so fond, the Muslims were so fond of Sri Aurobindo that even when he went to Pondicherry, the best of the singers, vocalists and instrumentalists, they begged for his audience. Baba Alauddin Khan played for Sri Aurobindo for 4 hours, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. And Abdul Karim Khan was going to sing for Sri Aurobindo on the way he died. This indicates that he was meaning a different kind of nationalism, which is not only spiritualism, but which leads to human unity. In Kolkata, there was a situational necessity. So, because my student has been working on it, I have not written anything on it. She has submitted her PhD recently and she has done very well. So I speak, but I don't write anything on this. Let her write. The point is, it is a totally distorted history of Sri Aurobindo which we get from these historians. And the reason is clear. They are Marxist historians, and Marxism won't accept anything that stresses on the individual, that stresses on individual sacrifice. In Vande Mataram and Karma Yogin, Sri Aurobindo was insisting on sacrifice of the individual. There was a situational necessity, there are stages of nationalism, and that stage required sacrifice. Sri Aurobindo said in the initial essay on the, not the initial essay, in an essay in the Karma Yogin, he said, a man capable of sacrifice has left the animal behind him. A man capable of sacrifice has left the animal behind him. So this was a stage when Sri Aurobindo's language was also, to me, because I have worked on Sri Aurobindo's stylistics and I have been in it for over 40 years. I have noticed that the language of Aurobindo Ghose and the language of Sri Aurobindo are different, because from 1910-11 onwards his language changed. And Sri Aurobindo also spoke against ordinary reason, ordinary intellect. Now there are two kinds of reason. One is ordinary reason, the other is higher reason. This higher reason is related to intellect, to intuition. Even if we don't get to intuition, if you have higher reason, you can see what Sri Aurobindo or Aurobindo Ghose is trying to mean. What I see is that there is a drastic change in Sri Aurobindo's language, Aurobindo Ghose's language and Sri Aurobindo's language. The ideas do not change much. It is almost same, evolving a bit through yoga, but the language is evolving. That is the most important thing. So the nation as mother, it could have been accepted, and it can be accepted even today. We have a distorted variety of Hinduism, I know, I understand. But the nation of as a mother is, it includes everybody, because Sri Aurobindo defended the Persian architecture, calling them Indo-Persian architecture, and he defended them against the English attack on them that they are sensuous. Sri Aurobindo said, no, Taj Mahal is not sensuous, it is spiritual. Fatehpur Sikri is not sensuous, it is spiritual. Buddhist paints are spiritual. And in Pondicherry, Sri Aurobindo retains his politics of resistance in many ways. Through all the texts, he was defending Indian culture. In an essay entitled Hindu Drama, he compares Elizabethan drama with Hindu drama, and plenty of Englishmen have attacked Kalidas's drama as no place. They are nothing. Sri Aurobindo said, why? They said, where is there the violence of an Othello, a Duchess of Malfi, in Macbeth? Where is the violence there? And Sri Aurobindo says that the average Hindu mind of the Middle Ages was non-violent. And so Kalidas's drama has no violence. It is a different kind of aesthetics. So an Indian play cannot imagine the violence of a Duchess of Malfi or Othello. As Matthew Arnold once said in an essay on the modern elements in literature, that the age of Pericles is far superior in culture than the Elizabethan age in England. Why? Because there was no bloodshed in the 6th century BC Athens. The Pericles of Athens had no bloodshed. And that is a sign of culture. Only Shakespeare saves the Elizabethan age. So culturally, the age is different. The aesthetics should be different. Indian aesthetics is different. Elizabethan aesthetics is different. There was nobody as educated as Sri Aurobindo to defend this. People speak of K.C. Bhattacharya these days, but he has written very slight. And there is a lot of inflated discussions on K.C. Bhattacharya. He is good, but you will notice he has no examples. K.C. Bhattacharya is good, but you can't replace Manmohan Ghose as a poet with Sri Aurobindo or K.C. Bhattacharya as a prose writer with Sri Aurobindo. This is to camouflage Sri Aurobindo, one of the greatest minds, one of the two great makers of modern Indian tradition. The other is Rabindranath Tagore. And he was twice nominated for the Nobel Prize, for 1943 for literature, in 1950 for world peace. So such a man was camouflaged. In Jadavpur, in the syllabus, they introduced Manmohan Ghose, not Sri Aurobindo. Manmohan Ghose is a third-rated poet. He may be Sri Aurobindo's brother. I shouldn't say this. But Manmohan Ghose instead of Sri Aurobindo is ridiculous. So even when Sri Aurobindo progresses, many people started asking Sri Aurobindo, you must be a great philosopher. And they started calling him a philosopher. Sri Aurobindo said, no, I'm not a philosopher. I'm primarily a poet and a politician. Imagine this is the point of departure I'm making from traditional criticism. And throughout his life, till the last day of his life, he was in politics, active politics, withdrawn, but extremely active. Well, his technique may be different. And to understand that technique, you have to lift yourself a bit from the ordinary consciousness to at least to the higher reason, even if we can't go to intuition. We can raise at least from Pope's rationality to something higher, a better rationality. So, Sri Aurobindo continued politics of resistance, and he did not like this European dominance. And you will be surprised, as Sugato Bose has quoted in another book, that he preferred Mohammedan history, barring Aurangzeb. He said it was a great age. If there is time, I can read out the passages, Sri Aurobindo's passages on the Mughals, on the great Mughals, whom he appreciates. And because he knew that India will be made with the help of these different kinds of people who will call the country mother. He demanded just one thing: call the country mother. And he never asked anybody to change their religion. Never. He rather said, to do my yoga, you don't have to change your religion. So instead of, from 1921-22 onwards, he started using the word mother instead of Shakti. And even sometimes as a synonym, he used the word force with F capital, or conscious force, which is the mediating force between Allah, the Supreme, and the human individual. In Life Divine, he uses plenty of words: absolute, illimitable, infinite. And as Whitman has also said, Allah, Allah, Allah is all. Allah is everywhere in every object. Allah is the Supreme. Allah is, there are two forms of Sri Krishna. One is the incarnation. One is the incarnation, the other is the divine Purushottam, which is synonymous with Allah. So many of my students know this, and it is a good sign that there is a lot of change in the Muslim mentality these days, and Muslim devotees of Sri Aurobindo are expanding in bulk. It's a good sign, because they have known this man is not Hindu, as this book has claimed. Sri Aurobindo is a Hindu, and he is responsible for the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha movements. This man has said, and I just laughed, what can I do? But this comes from those left thinkers. Bipan Chandra is there, Chatterjee is there, Dipesh Chakraborty is there, Rumila Thapar is there. And this is, Sri Aurobindo uses a very significant word in Kolkata, which every historian has missed. Towards the close of the Bonde Mataram and Karma Yogin articles, 1907 onwards, he used the word new nationalism, N capital in both, new nationalism, both in capital. And this new nationalism is related to humanism. So when Chittaranjan Das said, it was wonderfully prophetic. Chittaranjan Das was a great leader, but his personal life, he was not quite an ideal person. But his politics, his patriotism, you can't deny that. And it comes in great poetry long after this controversy is hushed into silence, long after he is dead and gone. He will be remembered as a poet of patriotism, as a prophet of nationalism, as a lover of humanity. His words will be echoed not just in India, but across the nations, across the lands. across the distant seas. Wonderful poetry and exact. So there is a link between all the three: poet of patriotism, prophet of nationalism, which is a new concept of nationalism. You have to understand this, which all the left historians have missed, either deliberately or due to lack of intuitive knowledge, because they are great intellectuals. I can't say they are not intellectuals. They are great intellectuals. They are cerebral thinkers. But beyond the intellect, there is another thing called intuition and a better rationality, a higher rationality. With that, you will know that this nationalism, or what he calls new nationalism, is something else, which Chittaranjan Das had indicated in the Bohm trial case, at the end of the Bohm trial case. And prophet of nationalism, poet of patriotism, lover of humanity are related terms. Aurobindo was a favorite of many Muslims who understood what he was meaning. But it was a great mass of ignorance. Even now, it's a great blank ignorance. We have to educate a lot. That please change your mentality. We are not against you. Unfortunately, the backlash has come because of the worldwide terror in the name of Islam. And naturally, there in India, there is a reaction against it. And it's not the time to speak of Sri Aurobindo, because Sri Aurobindo speaks of eternal religion, which is spirituality. And they have hijacked the phrase. And it is 10,000 years old. 10,000 years old, Aryan civilization, which Sri Aurobindo interprets for us. There is no good interpretation of the Vedas. I tell you, the Bengali books are unreadable. You come to aesthetics, there is no good Bengali book on Anandabardhan and Abhinavagupta, except for an introduction by Subodh Gupta. It's horrible. Sri Aurobindo interprets Anandabardhan's poetics in one chapter. It is entitled The Essence of Poetry in the Future Poetry. So this is his resistance. And when it comes to literature, he wrote a revised history of English poetry. Revised because, why revised? Because 70% was traditional, 30% were original. Like we have read from our childhood, from our boyhood, that Keats was a poet of beauty. What kind of beauty? We only know about sensuous beauty. Sri Aurobindo makes a gradation of Keats's beauty. Sensuous beauty, imaginative beauty, intellectual beauty, intuitive beauty, ideal or divine beauty. And like in Blake, he is traditional. What T.S. Eliot says in selected essays on Blake, he is echoing that. Eliot says, there is no conceptual framework of tradition behind Blake, in his short essay on Blake in selected essays. And Sri Aurobindo says, Blake cannot translate his experience into our comprehension. So many of the things are traditional, but he suddenly takes a leap. That is the yogic leap. And you have to understand, we have to understand this, that he is not an ordinary person. He is seeing. When he said, I'm not a philosopher, he said, most of my writings are inspired without any secretarial assistance, without any library assistance. I wrote from my memory, from my experience. And he couldn't revise all the books. 26 times he tried to revise the future poetry, and he failed each time. So many people in India think the future poetry is Sri Aurobindo's manifesto, Sri Aurobindo's poetic manifesto. It's wrong. Sri Aurobindo could not say what he had to say. R.Y. Deshpande, somebody has said, there is null like me. There are many good scholars of Sri Aurobindo in India, and I know people much better than me. R.Y. Deshpande is there. So it's not right to claim that. There are others who know better than me. And they have said, Deshpande has told me for the first time that no, Goutam, Sri Aurobindo is not final in the future poetry. He's struggling to express his view of mantra as poetry or poetry as mantra. It comes out clear only in his letters to K.D. Setna, his Parsi disciple. His Parsi disciple who also came to Santiniketan, to Rabindranath, and he then left Rabindranath and went to Pondicherry, settled down there. And most of Sri Aurobindo's letters on his aesthetics are written to Setna. Very few to Dilip Kumar Roy, but mostly to Setna. And together, if you take the future poetry with the letters, then it becomes a new theory of poetry. And remember, Eliot was writing his revolutionary theory of tradition and individual talent in 1919 in a lonely corner of the globe from 1917 to 1920. A lone person, a recluse, is giving an alternative theory of poetry. Poetry as not an escape from emotion, but which expresses and which comes out from the fountainhead of the spirit. And even epic will turn lyric in future. Even drama will be lyrical in future. These are the ideas with which he proved to the West that, well, see, India has so many things and I'm an Indian. So at the core of his heart, he was an Indian, not offending others. He wanted to say what India has. In the foundations of Indian culture, one by one, he takes up India's polity, India's architecture, the Persian, Indo-Persian architecture, the Buddhist paintings, and everywhere he asserts the Indianness. And of course, there is no greater event after Shakespeare in the language. Let me speak in Bengali. ইংরেজি ভাষা নিয়ে যা খুশি তাই করেছেন. There is no greater event after Shakespeare in the language. That is why so many people are being drawn to him these days. And Christians, Punjabis, Sikhs, and Muslims, they are coming to Sri Aurobindo because here you have an integral stuff. And he says that nationalism will stay. And you will remember that in the very first chapter, Benedict Anderson has said that nationalism it's not going to go very soon. For a different reason. Nationalism is not going to go soon. It will stay. Sri Aurobindo says it will stay because humanity is not yet ready to discard nationalism. And there he comes to his theory of evolution. Because human evolution is at a stage when it is not the stage to discard nationalism. Nationalism will stay. And in Kolkata, he had said that nationalism is the God. It is the voice of God that speaks through nationalism. Nationalism cannot die. Because in the ideal of human unity, he said, unity will be there. This book can be compared with Rabindranath's The Religion of Man. There also Rabindranath traces on the Upanishads, basically the traces on Isha Upanishad and other Upanishads. So because these are not religious texts, but Sri Aurobindo's Gita, Veda are totally taken out from the clutches of the Hindus, Orthodox Hindus. No, these are not your text. every Muslim, every Sikh, every Christian has a right to it because it speaks of the transformation of human nature, the lower vital, the physical, which will be changed by our true being, which is the psychic being. And when the psychic transformation comes, it will press us towards the spiritual plane, and from the spiritual to the supermind, where we have the new species. So nationalism is extremely important. And in 1919, Rabindranath Tagore totally changed his view of nationalism. Even in 1917, he said to his biographer Kripalani, I won't write on politics again. See in Kripalani's book, Tagore speaking to Kripalani, I won't write on politics again, because he felt he was wrong. And that is why Tagore was desperate in meeting Sri Aurobindo in 1928. He was in a very bad health, and he took plenty of labor to come down and to meet Sri Aurobindo only for 15 minutes, because Sri Aurobindo even refused Gandhi, but he gave time for Tagore, because both Tagore and Sri Aurobindo had a mutual respect for each other. Sri Aurobindo considers Tagore one of the three leading pioneers of mantric poetry in English literature. And we know what Tagore has said on Sri Aurobindo. And even Sri Aurobindo considers Tagore a great sadhak, a wayfarer towards the same goal as ours in his own way. So both his sadhana and his poetry are highlighted by Sri Aurobindo. And perhaps those few words are the best things that I have seen on Rabindra Sangeet and Tagore's poetry. I've tried to write a bit on that. But so this nationalism is not a small thing. It has a link with the lover of humanity, with a widening. Three things happening in Sri Aurobindo's yoga at the same time. And all are welcome for that. A widening of consciousness, a deepening of consciousness, and a heightening of consciousness. All these three are found in Whitman's poetry. And I have read a little of Whitman because of my wife's interest in it. But he goes well with Sri Aurobindo, exactly. When Subramania Swami asked Sri Aurobindo in Pondicherry what to do to write good poetry, Sri Aurobindo said, read Walt Whitman. So this is a nationalist who is only nationalist by courtesy. And there is no difference between Aurobindo Ghose and Sri Aurobindo. I have deconstructed the total misconception. And maybe some political reasons may be there, because the Marxists were they were appeasing the Muslims. And that has caused only harm. Appeasing the Muslims. Muslims must be one with us. They are Indians. We love them. Some of us are very close to us. Why differentiate with them? No difference. But these Marxist historians, they have created their own narrative. And they have sidelined totally Sri Aurobindo to occupy the scene. Now, if a political party hijacked Aurobindo, is it their fault? But maybe after this period is over, we can review Sri Aurobindo in a better light. So this was my speech today. I was trying to link Aurobindo Ghose and Sri Aurobindo. They are no two different people. The difference is only in the language, which suddenly changed surprisingly after 1914. And it's a miraculous change. And of course, the expressive function is much better. Sometimes it looks like he is speaking like a fanatic in Kolkata, but actually he's not a fanatic. He's not an extremist. He's trying to defend himself. No, I'm not an extremist. Don't call me an extremist. I'm trying to rebuild. I'm constructive. But who listens? So this is what I had to say today. In case you have questions, queries, I will answer.